Welcome back. This afternoon, a tri-services contingent from India also participated in the 75th Victory Parade at Red Square in Moscow. Remember, this was to commemorate the 75th year of the victory in the World War II over Nazi Germany. Rajnath Singh, Indian Defence Minister, was also present at the event. We're now joined by RTV's Murad to bring us more of the Indian presence in Moscow. Remember, this is happening at a time when India has also made very curt statements as far as the India-China face-off is concerned. So as the Indian contingent marched, Murad, India has sent a very strong message in the RIC trilateral as well as about its contributions, not just at World War II, but also overall as far as the place for India in the global realm is concerned today.
"75 years ago, the Victory Day Parade marked a return to normal life, an end to the Second World War. And one must understand what the Second World War was for Russia. Most Russian families lost an immediate relative, a son, a daughter, or a father, or a mother, a brother, or a sister in that war. Most Russian families, the demographic shock of losing so many people, tens of millions of civilians and soldiers, airmen, sailors, to the Nazi war machine, the sacrifice that this country made to beat Hitler's Germany is still understood in Russia. It is celebrated and mourned in equal measure every year. Now, for foreign viewers, many of them might not understand why 75 years since Russia still carries on with the parade, why it places so much emphasis on the parade and on showing its people, the latest military hardware and having troops parade down the Red Square. And there's a twofold significance here. The first and the primary one, of course, is to show Russian civilians that what happened during the Second World War will never happen again, that the Russian military will always be ready to repel any invader, and no longer will Russia have to sacrifice tens of millions of its citizens to beat a foreign invader. A second meaning in all of this, especially to Western viewers or to foreign viewers, is Russia showing off its latest hardware to the international community, to show, potential adversaries that Russia isn't easy pickings and won't be...
Well, it certainly was a grand affair and an important one. But given that this is coming in the midst of an India-China face-off, just give us a sense of how Russia's stand on the conflict has also been. Also for India, the S-400 deal and other defense deliverables continues to be a critical issue. How is the Kremlin looking at the developments?
This parade marked the end of the war, a return to normal life. Today, this parade, aside from celebrating and mourning the sacrifices of the Second World War, this parade also shows that we will conquer the pandemic, that life is slowly returning to normal, as it will across the entire world. But to date, this year, this is one of the biggest geopolitical events since the pandemic began. And of course, there were several world leaders here, as well as dignitaries from China and India, which is especially significant given the recent outbreak of hostilities between the two. And for both of them to come to Russia is not only, a symbolic gesture of friendship towards Russia, but it also a symbol of trust that in this difficult time they would choose both to send high-profile officials to Russia and even tolerate being next to each other, both India and China, here at this parade. There was a lot of speculation in Russian media about a potential meeting, a little peace summit between the Indian defense minister and Chinese dignitaries, that perhaps they would be able to, on the sidelines, unofficially, perhaps it's too early, the wounds are still too sore, but perhaps talk to each other. We don't know whether that has happened. Perhaps we won't even know. Perhaps they, passed messages to each other through Russian intermediaries. But we also know that India is applying pressure, pressuring Russia to fulfill its obligations on a 2-year-old contract for 400 anti-air missiles, an air defense complex, one of the most sought after and efficient in the world. It's 2 years old. It was 2 years ago in October 2018 that the leader of India signed a $5 billion contract with Russia to supply India with those missiles. But it is generally a very long procedure. So it is obviously very high technology. There's a lot of bureaucracy. There's all sorts of secrets and all sorts of details that must be worked out in such a high-profile deal. And as we know, traditionally these take a very long time. Now, with an outbreak of hostilities between India and China, there's pressure from the Indian side, which is very committed to this deal, even financially, a huge amount of money for Russia to get a move on, to supply those missiles when India needs them, because there is a very rich history of military cooperation between India and Russia. Buying weapons isn't going to the store and buying a microwave. There's an element of trust that has to be there, that what you're getting for huge amounts of money will work, because literally Indians' lives, the lives of Indian civilians and citizens and taxpayers who are paying for this are at stake. These weapons must defend them. And India, in this difficult time, wants to get what it is paying for. China, of course, also a big, huge trade partner for Russia, also pulling on the other end, both sides wanting to get Russia on their side in this difficult time during this bitter conflict when, it's all up in the air. Anything could come of this. Russia, meanwhile, has chosen to play the middle, not to take China's side and not to step out on India's side. China, a big buyer of Russian weapons. So Russia's been trapped in a difficult position. It may seem strange hearing this from Russia when it's India and China that are engaged in a conflict, but Russia has cultivated this friendship with both India and China for a very long time, and it is in Russia's interest that it isn't forced to come out and pick a side, that it gets the two together to sort out their differences and to move forward as together as the BRICS nations. There's plenty of difficulties and plenty of hardships, economic, social, in China, in Russia, in India, without involving themselves in a conflict. Guessing at what the Kremlin will do, there's a word for that. It's called Kremlinology, and it isn't so dissimilar to astrology. It's about as accurate. There's no telling what position Russia will take, whether it'll speed up the delivery of Indian missiles, whether China might take a lot of offense to that. Needless to say, it's up to the diplomats to sort it out, to sort the fine print out, to come to agreeable terms for all sides involved. And this isn't just bureaucratic talk. There's a lot at stake here. If you read between the lines, the statements coming from Russian diplomatic officials and government officials has always been the same with regards to this conflict between India and China. It doesn't want to fold to the demands of either side. What it wants is for the BRIC nations to come together, to sort out their differences and to continue as a friendly group.